Well, this is probably a little bit of an unusual meeting for us, and I think you're in for a great treat, certainly entertaining. You might even find it informative. We'll see here in just a moment. It's fun to be able to introduce Evan Smith, our guest speaker. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune, a nonprofit, nonpartisan digital news organization recently called one of the nonprofit news sector's runaway success stories. The Tribune's deep coverage of Texas politics and political policy can be found at its website at texastribune.org, in newspapers and on TV and radio stations across the state, and in print and online editions of the Washington Post. Since its launch in 2009, the Tribune has won international acclaim and numerous awards, more numerous to even mention right now. Evan spent nearly 18 years with the Texas Monthly, including 8 years as the editor and 1 year and a year as the president and editor-in-chief of the Texas Monthly. Some might say, well, how's all this going to fit into economic development? Well, you know, with every one of those projects that Adrian spoke about, there's always a lot of behind-the-scenes communication and things that have to happen to make those projects happen and successful, and they almost always involve politics, policies, and the people, the population. And so today, Evan's going to talk to us a little bit about where we are and have a discussion about where we're going. Evan?
Good afternoon. Nice to be with you. I can't tell you how happy I am to be in Victoria and not in Austin. You may share that point of view. I've got to put this on. Let me see how I turn this thing on here. Let's see. How's that? Is that better? Great. It is always the case that when I leave Austin, I feel better because Austin, as you know, is like Disneyland. It's a theme park. It is not the real world. And if you do what I do, which is pay attention to politics and public policy and pay attention to everything that affects everybody in Texas, it is especially not the real world. It is a bubble. The only way that you understand what Texas really wants and needs and what people in this state want and need is to get out of Austin. So the opportunity to come to Victoria was one I was eager to have. And I will tell you as well that we love the Victoria Advocate in Austin and at the Texas Tribune. And Chris Cobb, where's Chris? Chris is there. So I've had the opportunity to have Chris's daughter Nicole work for us a couple times over the last few years while she's been finishing up at the university. We've hired some reporters who were trained wonderfully at the Victoria Advocate. I think you're all very lucky to have the Advocate here in Texas. The media landscape is in Texas as elsewhere kind of choppy. Depending upon where you go, it's either good or bad, but I think the Advocate is serving this community extremely well. And so I'm pleased to be here in the company of Chris and his colleagues and to have the opportunity to talk to all of you about the work that we do and what's happening in Texas from a politics and from an economic standpoint. This is the website of the Texas Tribune, texastribune.org, as you heard Dale say. And let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we are as a backdrop for my remarks. We have been in business now going on 8 years. We started in the fall of 2009, and I had been at Texas Monthly, as you heard, for almost 18 years. In the time that I was at Texas Monthly, I watched coverage of public policy and politics in Texas decline precipitously. So I got here in 1991 to work at the magazine, and at that time, 26 years ago, there was still a Houston Post, as well as the Houston Chronicle. Some of you remember the Post. There was still a Dallas Times-Herald, as well as a Dallas Morning News. There was still a San Antonio Light. There was still an afternoon newspaper in El Paso to go with the morning paper as recently as 25 years ago. And maybe more important than that, the number of reporters at the Capitol covering public policy and politics in Texas was 3 times the size in 1991 as it was when I left Texas Monthly in 2009. Media business contracted. Newspapers could no longer employ as many people, and what was left was not an enormous amount of coverage of this stuff, public policy and politics. I looked at this, others in the Capitol community looked at it and said we have to come up with a way to solve this problem, because even if you cannot make a buck in the for-profit media business off of covering public policy and politics, that doesn't mean it's not important to the health of our communities and to the health of our state. People need to be informed and engaged. They need to know what's going on because it affects their lives. Everything affects them. Public education, health care, higher education, immigration, the decisions made at the Capitol by the people who represent you matter to your communities. They matter to your families and they matter in your lives individually, and so we need to provide a regular source of information for people to find out what's happening in public policy and politics. That was what we did with the Texas Tribune. This was the mission then, this is the mission of the organization now. All we do is cover public policy, politics, and statewide issues. You can get all that other stuff in other places. Keywords here are nonprofit and nonpartisan. Nonprofit is the way we run our business. We decided to be nonprofit because we believe we're performing a service to the community. We think we exist in the public interest. We're making our community better, smarter, and healthier by making our community members more thoughtful and productive and engaged citizens. The idea is give people information, they will be motivated to participate civically, and by doing so, they'll make their communities and the state better. So we're a 501c3. We raise money from individuals, foundations, and corporations to support our important work, and I'm pleased to tell you that we've raised almost $45 million in a little less than 8 years to support this kind of journalism. And that's people from all parts of the state geographically. It's people from every background politically who support us. It's foundations, it's corporations, all buy into the idea that a more informed state is a better state, that a smarter Texas is a better Texas. And the nonpartisan part is a real thing. I know what you're thinking. I travel to places like Victoria all the time and I say nonpartisan journalism and people roll their eyes. They think it's like jumbo shrimp, an oxymoron. I get that. But you know what? What the world needs is less confirmation bias on the left and the right. People need to be given facts. They need to be given information and then decide what they want to do with that information. They do not need to be told what to think. And that happens too often on the left and the right in the media these days. People are told what to think. We do not editorialize on issues. We do not endorse candidates or campaigns. We simply provide people with facts, and then they go off and decide what they want to do with that information. Hopefully it gives them the means to be more active in their communities, to write to their member of Congress or to their state legislator, to go to a community meeting, to advocate for better schools or more opportunities for health care. We don't decide for people what they do with that information. We are not in the leading horses to water business. But we do believe that there's an opportunity through nonpartisan journalism to give people the information they need to be better Texans and for this to be a better Texas. So that's what we do, and we're pleased to have had the opportunity to do it for now, as I said, going on 8 years. What do? We do three things. We do news reporting, we do data, and we do events. The news is of a traditional sort: breaking news, daily news, beat reporting, as well as long-form investigative projects. Here's one that we did last year on officer-involved shootings across the state of Texas. Here's another one we did on the threat to the city of Houston and to Harris County of a major storm for which that region of the state is absolutely not prepared, and the impact that it would have on Texas and on the rest of the country. We won a Peabody Award along with the folks at ProPublica for this project, which was published early last year. Every day we give our content away to newspapers like The Advocate. We are effectively functioning as a free news wire service of sorts. We create all this content, we put it out to the world. Anybody who wants to run it can run it once a week, every day, some of our content, all of our content. I woke up today to see that a Texas Tribune story was on the front page of the Longview newspaper. We had a story on the front page of the Brownsville newspaper. These communities deserve to have information as much as the big cities do. But most of the papers outside the 5 big cities, Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, have no coverage at the capital of their own. They're either forced to pay the Associated Press what I consider to be hostage prices for generic content, or they have no coverage at all of what happens at the Capitol. And you know, the net effect of that is that people outside the 5 big cities don't really know what the people at the Capitol representing them are doing. They don't know about the fights happening over school finance or school choice or standardized testing or border security or transportation and toll roads and the like. They don't know those fights are going on, and they don't understand the stakes they have and the outcomes of those fights. My one vote in Austin is no different than Chris's one vote here in Victoria. But I have access to more information that is the basis for my vote than Chris has and is the basis for his. I am no more of a Texan than he is. Why should he have less information about this stuff than I do? We're trying to rectify that inequity by making our content available across the state so that everybody is in the same place in terms of what they know. 250 news organizations get an email from us every day saying, here's everything we have on the site today, here's everything that's going to be up there tomorrow, take what you want. And that's how things end up on the front page of the Longview and the Brownsville papers and so on. We stream the proceedings of the Texas House and the Texas Senate on the floor and all the committee hearings on our website, and as well on Facebook, where we add to that commentary from reporters on the floor and back in the office so that you can actually watch along with your Texas legislature and get a sense of what your elected officials are doing. We provide interactive maps of the Capitol so you can find your representatives' offices if you go up there. We provide seating charts for the House and the Senate. We provide newsletters that give you access to the kind of information you need in your inbox every day or every week or every month. The point of all this is to make this as easy as possible for you to be as informed as possible. We also do a lot of database journalism. We go out and find big sets of information, public information, make them searchable and sortable and available to you to pore over. So whether it's the salaries of public employees at various entities in the state of Texas or information about the performance and financial efficiency of every single public school or school district in the state of Texas, we want you to have access to this information. You have a right to it, and so we provide it to you in a way that makes it easily accessible. And then we do about 50 events a year around the state. We take elected officials back home, put them in front of an audience like this one of their constituents. We ask them hard questions about public ed and healthcare and water and energy, and then you get to ask questions of those elected officials as well. We think of this as accountability journalism in real time, where we really are making people who represent communities answer to those communities for the work that they're doing. We live stream those events. If you're not able to come, you can watch them in real time on your computer or on your phone or tablet. We post video after the fact. The big event we do every year is the Texas Tribune Festival, 3 days, an ideas conference of sorts. Last year, 250 speakers, including Senator Ted Cruz. We've had Senator Cornyn at this event. We had Representative Farenthold many times at this event as well. We had last year more than 250 speakers, 4,000 people attend this event. This year's festival is September 22nd, 3rd, and 4th. If you care about this sort of stuff, it is the best way to spend a weekend diving deep on public policy and politics in the state of Texas. We love to have you. Why is all this important? Texas loves to be first and best at everything, right? We know this. We love this state, and we love the fact that this state believes it is exceptional. The reality is that at least in one area, we're not all that good, and that's in voter turnout. In fact, in voter turnout, the state of Texas is not only not good and not exceptional, we're dead last. We're the worst. Over the last 4 election cycles, Texas has the lowest voter turnout of any state in the whole country, net. 2010, we were 51st out of 50. How is that even possible, 51st out of 50? We were behind the other 49 states in Washington, D.C. In 2012, and this is a helpful visualization from the New York Times, we were all the way up to 48th out of 51. This map shows you areas of the country colored in where the voting eligible participation was below 50%. As you can see, Texas is pretty much colored in the entire way. In 2014, we were back down to 49th. And in 2016, an election in which, let's be honest, everybody in Texas and everybody in the country could not wait to vote, whether you were on the Trump train, or you were with her, or you were with Gary Johnson, whoever you were for in that last election. People could not wait to vote. People were vibrating over this election. First day, 7 o'clock in the morning of early vote, people are lining up at the library to go vote. In this election, maybe the most important election any of us will ever vote in, we were 50th. Only Hawaii had worse voter turnout than Texas in 2016. So net, the worst voter turnout over the last 4 election cycles in this country. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Look, the media bears some responsibility for failing to do its job. What is the media's job? The media's job is to tell you all of us, what is important enough for us to stop in our busy lives, work lives, and home lives and pay attention to. If we don't tee up things that are important enough for you to pay attention to, you will not stop and pay attention. The media doesn't do its job, voter turnout, I would submit to you, goes down. Another big problem is redistricting. We have profoundly non-competitive elections in this state. People don't vote in November because they believe the system is rigged, because the winner of an election is known the day after a primary in almost every case. Can you argue with that? Let's say you live in Victoria, which is an overwhelmingly Republican community, right? Majority Republican by some factor. and you're a Republican and Election Day comes around and Jeannie Morrison is on the ballot, and you decide you have someplace you need to be and you're not going to go vote, but you know that even if you don't vote, it doesn't make a difference because the way they've drawn the map, Jeannie Morrison's going to win anyway, and you don't vote. Could you argue with that logic? What if you're a Democrat and there happens to be a Democrat running against Jeannie Morrison? Don't know if there was one this last time. In a lot of districts, there's not even a major party opponent because they've drawn the maps in such a way that the major party doesn't even bother to field a candidate. You're a Democrat in this district and you have someplace you need to be, and you go, well, ordinarily I'd go try to get Jeannie Morrison out of office, but we're never going to be able to do that. There aren't enough Democratic votes the way they've drawn the district. I'm not going to vote. It doesn't make a difference. Can you argue with that? The fact is that we give people plenty of reason not to believe their vote matters. And I think that's a major driver of why people in Texas, at least, don't vote, because our elections are profoundly non-competitive. By the way, when the Democrats ran the state, redistricting was just the same. The people in power, Democrat or Republican, want to stay in power. And when you have a system where the people in power draw the lines, they're going to draw the lines for their own benefit. So this is not something that's going to change. Our voter turnout is not likely to go up by any significant amount anytime soon because of the way we give people a way out of voting. Now look, the issues that affect all of us in Texas ought to be enough to get people to turn out to vote because we do have a stake in this stuff. In Texas, we have a situation in which the issues that begin here migrate out to the rest of the country. We really do drive the national conversation on so many issues. Think about health care. Even after 7 years of the Affordable Care Act, whether you liked it or didn't, and we know that the state of Texas institutionally, most especially, did not like it, Texas now has 17.1%, 4.6 million people without health insurance. We are number one in the whole country in the percentage and in the raw number of our citizens without health insurance. Before the Affordable Care Act, it was 25% and 6 million. That population of uninsured went down not because we embraced the Affordable Care Act, but despite the fact that we didn't. In other states that did embrace it, the population of the uninsured went down at a faster rate. Fine. We still have 4.6 million, 17.1%. The health care conversation in this country about what to do with the uninsured, the health care aspect of it, the economics aspect of it, is very much a Texas conversation as it is attached to any other state because we really are putting a big magnifying glass on this issue. And we have a second problem in addition to not having enough people, say, with insurance. We have a shortage of doctors. Texas has 254 counties, and more than half of the counties in Texas are designated by the federal government as health professional shortage areas. Not enough doctors. 35 counties have no doctors at all. 80 counties in Texas have no psychiatrist, no gynecologist, no surgeon. This is a big problem. If we insured everybody tomorrow, everybody had health insurance tomorrow, there would not be enough doctors to treat all the people in the state of Texas. And right now, healthcare costs in the state of Texas are going up in a way that I would say is like a hockey stick. For years and years, education was the number one line item in the state budget, state of Texas budget. No close second. In the current budget cycle we're in right now, education and healthcare are for the first time ever tied. Spending 36% on education, 36% on healthcare. In the next budget, healthcare will be, for the first time in the history of Texas, the number one line item in the state budget. We've got to get control of this. So this is a big conversation. Reason enough for people in the state of Texas to pay attention, to go to the polls, to get active in their communities. How about the border? We have more contiguous miles in Texas with the Mexican border than any other state. Immigration is a Texas problem, first and foremost. We're the ones who understand this problem better than other places. When we hear congressmen from Iowa or New Hampshire weighing in on border security and immigration reform, please. This is our issue. It should principally be our issue. The question of what to do with the undocumented population in this country is really one that we grapple with every day. The impact of the removal of undocumented people from our economy, from our agricultural and construction industries, is really a conversation we have in this state all the time. How to reform border security, immigration, all that is a Texas conversation first and foremost. So we drive that conversation as much as we drive the healthcare conversation. Energy, you know, we still produce the most crude oil of any state in the country. The energy conversation is first and foremost a Texas conversation. The decisions we make on energy policy affect all of us in this state so much. And look, it's great to be the #1 crude oil producer in the country at any time. It's especially good when the price of oil is $100 a barrel or better. It's not so great when the price of oil is $26 a barrel as it was a year ago, January. Now today it's 47, 48, 49 bucks. Maybe it's up to 50. I've stopped looking. I used to get up every day and the first thing I would do was look at the price per barrel of oil. It got depressing. So I stopped. I'll go back to it. But you know that the price per barrel of oil and the health of the energy sector in Texas generally really does matter to all of us. Back in the late 80s when the oil and gas economy went into the drink and we as a state went into the drink with it, oil and gas was 22% of the Texas economy. Today we are better insulated. It's only 14%. But the fact is, even with it at 14%, it still has a material effect on all of us, as I'll talk about when I get into the state budget in a second. When oil and gas is not doing well, Texas is not doing well, period. So it does definitely make a difference what happens on that. You know, the gun conversation is a Texas conversation. We passed an open carry law in the 2015 session. People went, oh my God, we're going to legalize open carry in the state of Texas. The reality is that Texas was the 45th state in the country to legalize open carry. Why did we wait so long? How did we allow Massachusetts to legalize open carry before we did? That's nuts. And in fact, if you look at what's happened over the time that open carry has been legal in Texas, it's been kind of a nothing burger. It hasn't really been much of an issue. Campus carry was legalized as well. Campus carry has been basically not much of an issue. The big difference with Texas and the other states that had open carry on the books is every other state that had open carry, the legislatures gave the big cities an opt-out. And everybody else's big cities opted out. We did not give our big cities an opt-out. So we have the largest cities in the country with open carry of handguns. And so the gun conversation is definitely one that we think about as our conversation first and foremost. And of course the federalism conversation. We were 10th Amendment before 10th Amendment was cool in Texas. There is nothing that we've liked to do over the last 10 years better than sue the federal government. When Greg Abbott was the Attorney General, he was asked, what is your job? Attorney General, he said these words pretty much. I get up in the morning, I go in the office, I sue the federal government, and I go home. So we have pushed back on the federal government. And it's not just about suing. It's about the idea that we don't want the federal government to tell us what to do. We wanted to reserve the right to run our state the way we want to run it. We want as little oversight and as little pushback from the federal government as possible. Now, I can tell you that many of us in this room probably didn't expect the outcome of the presidential election on November the 8th, whether you were for Donald Trump or against him. It looked up until the very last that he might not win the election. And I think that the apparatus of suing the federal government was revving up for the Clinton presidency. And then Trump gets in and it's like, well, good, maybe we can now dismantle this whole, we're going to sue the federal government at the drop of a hat deal. I noticed that Ken Paxton, I'm assuming it was muscle memory or one for the road, sued the federal government the other day. I expect that over time that's going to go down toward the horizon line, maybe not to zero, but pretty close. But this has been a major conversation that has come from Texas. Rick Perry effectively governed this state as the president of the Federal Republic of anti-Obama, did he not? Anything that came out of the federal government we did not like, and we pushed back. So the tone of that and the tenor of that is going to change. But look, federalism, like everything else, is a Texas conversation. Here are 3 reality checks that I want to talk to you about at some length as they relate to the economy of Texas. You are largely a group of folks who care about economic health, economic development, not just in Victoria, but in Texas. And so as I'm thinking about what's going on right now in Texas and in this country, I want to talk to you about 3 areas that may be of interest to you. We'll get down into some details. The first thing is, this has been a very tough legislative session. You may know if you follow this stuff that we are in legislative session 140 days every 2 years. People would like it to be, some people, 2 days every 140 years. I get that. Those of us in the press, we wish they were in every day, every year, because it's fun when they're around. So 140 days every 2 years. We are about 10 days as I stand here from this thing being over. In fact, it's Memorial Day. It's 11 days. is when they sine die, when they gavel out. So we have a pretty clear sense of 95% or more of what's going on. And honestly, the die was cast at the beginning. Every 2 years, the Controller of Public Accounts, basically the state's CFO, as of 2014, Glenn Hager, the former state senator from Katy, the day before the session gavels in January, he tells us how much money we have to spend. This is the revenue estimate for the state of Texas. And when times are good, as I referred to in 2015, when the price of oil was $100 or more per barrel, we have a lot of money to spend. The controller is practically giddy over what the revenue estimate that he's going to deliver to the state. And in fact, the revenue estimate going into the 2015 session was great. The revenue estimate going into the 2017 session, not entirely because of oil and gas, but largely was not great. In fact, it was not only a decrease over the previous budget cycle on a percentage basis, but in real dollars, it was a significant drop from what we had 2 years ago. We started off this budget cycle, depending upon how you do the math, anywhere between $6 billion and $10 billion behind what we spent last time. 6 to 10 billion behind. That was assuming we only spent on the exact same things we spent last time. We were 6 to 10 behind, assuming no spending on things that were not in the last budget. But of course, we come into any 2-year budget cycle with a list of things that we didn't spend money on last time, that we put off. An example would be blowing up the foster care system of the state of Texas. One of the rare bipartisan issues at the moment in Texas was the need to reform foster care. That's got a price tag of a couple $100 million, $400–500 million. That was not factored into the last budget. Or how about spending money on some of the state's mental health hospitals, which have been fall-down facilities for some time. There's a great need to invest in those facilities. We didn't spend that money in the last budget. So we were $6 to $10 billion behind before you started adding additional things on. That set a very difficult tone at the beginning of this session. As I said, the oil price was problematic for the state. 14% is not what it used to be, but it was still bad. And the reality is that we began to see job losses in the state of Texas that we had not seen for some time. Rick Perry, as governor, was great at many things. He was really the chief economic development officer for the state of Texas, wasn't he, for those 14 years? He would travel the country and pickpocket businesses from other states, bring them and their employees here, help prop up the economy of Texas. He would go around to places with high tax burdens like Connecticut or Illinois or California and talk about low taxes and predictable regulation and tort reform. He would sell the blessings of Texas. Easy to sell Texas, right, to the rest of the country. But he also had the benefit of very different times to operate as the chief economic development officer. Harder right now. For 120 consecutive months, the unemployment rate of the state of Texas was below the national average. Even during that awful recession of the mid part of that first decade, we still had more people employed than the national average, and that changed. Now our unemployment rate is not only below the national average, but worst of all, it's below California. Or it's above California, I should say. I mean, amazing. So that record of 120 months is now gone. Right now our unemployment rate is 5% in the state of Texas. And the national unemployment rate is 4.5%. So we began to see at the beginning part of this session what has now come to pass, which is that the job picture and the economic picture for the state of Texas was beginning to go down. And the reality is that the work in this session has not necessarily pointed us toward the kind of economic recovery that we want, beginning with the question of economic incentives. One of the features of the Rick Perry years as governor and of Texas from about 2002, 2003 up through the last couple of years was that we were generous with the incentives that we provided to corporations to come to locate in the state of Texas. We were eager to partner with communities that would also offer incentives to come to the state of Texas. We had a film incentive program, you may know if you care about the arts, where we would say to film companies, come shoot your movie or shoot your television show in the state of Texas. For every $1 that you spend, we're going to get $8 back in return. The difference is that this used to be an economics issue, and today it's a politics issue. Yesterday's economic incentives are today's corporate welfare. The conversation around economic incentives has changed. and they're now frowned on by enough people at the Texas legislature that in this legislative session, the dollars available to help attract businesses, to do the kind of economic development work that you all support, are much lower. The funds that operate out of the governor's office have all been gutted. And they've been gutted across the board. They've been gutted for pure economic incentives for businesses to relocate here. The film incentives have been gutted. Even the dollars that the governor put in the last session toward attracting the best faculty for our universities, the governor's University Research Initiative, an economic incentive program of sorts, was gutted in this legislature. So the first thing to know about the economy of the state of Texas as it relates to this session is that we have fewer dollars available to help our economy stand up against that of other states. A second thing I'll observe is that in the case of two controversial pieces of legislation, we do not yet know, but there may very well be an economic impact on the state of Texas based on what this legislature decides. Now, the jury is still out on whether the so-called bathroom bill is going to pass our legislature. It looked like it would, then it looked like it wouldn't, and now it looks like it may again. If you're not familiar with this legislation, who in the state of Texas hasn't heard something about this, right? This is a piece of legislation that seeks to regulate access to women's locker rooms, restrooms, and showers. Supporters of this bill say we have a problem, prospective problem with men in these facilities. Opponents of this say there's not really a problem we're trying to solve. This is ultimately a way to discriminate against transgender Texans. You've heard the argument, the political argument. But the economics of this, for our purposes today, are more interesting because the state of North Carolina went through a period of time having such a bill on their books in which they saw sports events like the NCAA finals, concerts, tourism activities, company relocations, the recruitment of millennial employees, tourism business, to the tune of several $billion, it is alleged, go away as a result of this bill. Supporters of the bathroom bill in Texas dispute that those numbers are legitimate. But the fact is there is concern, anxiety about what kind of an impact on the state of Texas's economy will result from this bill. That is something that if you care about economic development, you should be focused on. We don't yet know and may not know until such a bill were in effect what the impact on the state's economy would be. But there is absolutely anxiety about that. The second thing we do know is that a sanctuary cities bill has passed, and there is, to a lesser degree, but still to some degree, concern about boycotts that may result from our having that legislation on the books. So here's two pieces of legislation that could have potentially an adverse impact on the economy of the state of Texas. Then we had the whole fight over local control. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when local control meant that the locals controlled things. That doesn't happen as often in the state of Texas, where the state is getting into the business of telling communities where they consider the actions of those communities to be detrimental, here's what you can do and cannot do. And this, of course, began with the decisions of my fellow residents of Austin to require certain things of the ride-hailing companies that caused those ride-hailing companies to pick up and leave town. State decided what the residents of Austin wanted to do was not okay. We need consistent regulation, community to community, and they have passed a bill that will strip from the local communities the ability to regulate their relationships with these ride-hailing companies. Uber and Lyft have already said they're going to come back into the city of Austin. All these local control conversations all breadcrumb back in some respects to the economic health of our communities. What communities can and cannot do, how residents can and cannot behave, how companies can and cannot be regulated. That's a big feature of this legislative session. It has been a complicated conversation. And you've had a lot of local elected officials, Republicans, Democrats, independents, complaining about the state getting in their way back home. The social and physical infrastructure investment in the state as a result of the economy not being great and the budget not being great is really in question. Have we spent enough on public education in a state that is growing quickly and is adding 82,000 kids to the public school system a year? We know that even if public education is not getting hurt too badly this session, higher ed is getting killed. Higher ed campuses around this state, public university, main campuses, and regional campuses like the one we're on, are going to experience cuts of between 6 and 10% in their state appropriations at a minimum. There is an attempt in the legislature to also freeze tuition. Now, who doesn't like to have frozen tuition? If you're a parent or if you're a kid, you love it. But the reality is that these universities are strapped for resources to educate the next generation of workers and leaders in the state, and they're saying that to cut our appropriation and to freeze our tuition is almost too much. And then the third of the triple whammies is that at the federal level we're seeing cuts to financial aid programs like the Pell Grant. So you've got frozen tuition, you've got cut state appropriations, you've got cut federal financial aid. This has been a very bad session for higher ed. Now, the good news if you're in the small business arena is that there's talk of a cut of the business tax. In fact, an eventual phasing out of the business tax. But understand what that means. That has the potential to be $6 billion that the state will not have to spend on things like public education, healthcare, roads, on and on and on. It's a trade-off. And that's really what this is ultimately about. We are making choices with finite resources for the benefit of this state and its citizens today and tomorrow. Every dollar we spend is a choice dollar and not a referendum dollar. Every dollar we spend in the state of Texas is not public education versus not public education. It's public education versus healthcare. It's public education versus transportation. It's public education versus border security. Every budget, as the saying goes, is a moral document. It tells you about your priorities. And we as a state have got to decide what our priorities are. And so if we cut the franchise tax, for instance, that means that we're taking $6 billion out of the state's kitty that we are not going to spend on things like schools and roads and health care. The second thing I'll observe is no matter who you voted for last November, this has been, to this point, something of a chaos presidency. And I think the news of the last couple days, the fire hose of news, unending, can't take your eyes off it because you'll miss something important, is beginning to create in the minds of many people uncertainty about where we are going. Look at what happened with the Dow just yesterday. Directly in response to the news of the previous couple days. There is uncertainty. This is not about the ideology of the president. This is not about the outcome of the election. It is simply that we have found ourselves in a situation in which this overwhelming amount of, there's no other word for it, chaos over the last few months is overwhelming any efforts to pass a legislative agenda in Congress that would ultimately be meaningful to places like Texas and communities like this one. I think back to the president being elected on November the 8th. And the thought in Texas was, well, at least in two areas, the state is going to see relief by having a Republican president and a Republican administration. One is on the aforementioned topic of health care. In Texas, we have been saying for how long we don't like the Affordable Care Act. What we want is for a repeal of Obamacare and an opportunity to get those dollars back to Texas and let us solve the problem of insuring our people ourselves. But it hasn't happened yet, and the prospects for it with each additional day of chaos get pushed further and further and further off. So far, we're not seeing any material effect on our prospects to get any of those dollars back and reduce the amount of spending that we see in the state budget. The second issue was border security. 2 years ago, we appropriated $800 million for border security because we said the federal government was not doing its job. Trump gets elected. He gets elected talking about building a wall. He gets elected talking about deporting a certain number of people from the state. And all of a sudden, we think, great, we don't have to spend $800 million again on border security because the federal government is going to take care of it. That hasn't happened yet. There's not any sense that there's going to be a wall necessarily. In fact, there's a lot of opposition to the wall by politicians in the state of Texas and by residents of the border communities that would be most affected by it. It is uncertain at best that the president's plans on either health care or border security are going to make in the end. And the chaos of the last couple of months makes it less certain and less likely as opposed to more certain and more likely. And look, I say, as the millennials might in your lives, as I have millennials in my lives, you may have them in your lives, we are living in woke nation right now. Everybody in this country, if you think they were vibrating on Election Day, you can't pull up to a stoplight in Austin or in a big city without encountering a protest. I'm in the business of complaining about people not being sufficiently civically engaged. I'm almost nostalgic for 3 months ago when nobody gave a crap, honestly, okay? It's a little bit too much. But I want to give you a caution about where all this goes. You know, people are really agitated right now in this country about politics. It ultimately means nothing unless they turn out to vote. It means nothing unless they can take this moment and turn it into a movement. And there is no evidence yet that that's where this is headed. But this is another form of chaos that we just have to understand is causing, as a result, uncertainty about where all of this is headed. And uncertainty politically translates into uncertainty economically. It has always been the case. It will be the case. You know it, and I know it. Now, we do have certain things that we've seen of a concrete sort from the administration. I highlight this one because it is relatively recent. This was a story in the Washington Post just the other day that says that at the federal level, there's going to be an attempt to cut funding to public education and redirect people's time, focus, and energy to school choice. This would have a material impact on the state of Texas, which has the second highest public ed enrollment in the country. And we've just gone through our own battle over school choice, probably resolved to this point, in the Texas legislature. We don't know what's going to happen, but you just have to pay attention to this stuff at the federal level because it does have an impact ultimately on Texas. The third thing I want to talk to you about is demographics, population, and this is really what I think is the most important thing that we all should be paying attention to in the state of Texas. There is this thing called the Texas myth. If you've lived here long enough, you've heard it. The Texas myth. We're a rural state, we're a ranching state, we're an ag state. If you're the editor of Texas Monthly, as I was for many years, you play the Texas myth like a Stradivarius. I would have put a barefoot cowgirl on the cover of Texas Monthly every month if I could have gotten away with it. Here's the thing. The Texas myth is, in fact, a myth. The idea that Texas is a rural state or a ranching state is simply false. These are the most recent census numbers for the largest population cities in the country. Texas now has 3 of the 10 and 6 of the 20 largest cities in the country, more than any other state. Houston is number 4 in population, San Antonio is number 7, Dallas is 9, Austin is 11, Fort Worth is 16, El Paso is 20. 6 of the 20 largest cities in the country are in Texas. We are an urban state. We're an urban state. 75% of the population of Texas is east of Interstate Highway 35. And our cities are growing quickly. And our rural populations and our rural counties are shrinking. We do not legislate and we do not appropriate like an urban state. And heading to the future, from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, we have got an obligation to begin to think like an urban state because an urban state is what we are. The challenges and the problems of an urban state, the opportunities of an urban state are not 100% different from those of just a state. But the fact is the big cities have issues that are particular to the big cities. And we're not focused enough on those in our legislature. The second issue is what I think of as demographic inevitability. Not only a growing population, but a changing population. And again, growth is important enough, right? When I moved here in 1991 to Texas, we were at 15 million residents. Today we're at 28 million. By 2050, we will be at 54 million Texans. The population of the state of Texas between now and 2050 is going to double. Think about that. Think about the impact on this state of a population that doubles between now and 2050. But let's talk about the demographic breakdown by ethnicity, by race. In the state of Texas in 2000, which is for all practical purposes yesterday, this is the breakdown between the Anglo and the Hispanic population by age group. These slides are from Steve Murdoch, the former state demographer and the former U.S. Census Bureau director. In 2000, which again is for all practical purposes yesterday, the only age group in Texas in which Hispanics outnumbered Anglos was 5 and under. And in fact, even at that point, the Hispanic population of 5 and under was not the majority of that age group. This is now what I'm going to show you is 2040. 2040, which is for all practical purposes tomorrow in the state of Texas. In 2040 in Texas, the Hispanic population will be 55%, Anglo population will be 32%. Today it's 45% Anglo, 37% Hispanic. So it's going to flip. In 2040, the only age group in Texas in which Anglos will still outnumber Hispanics is 65 and older. In every other age group, Hispanics will represent a majority of the population group, and when you get down to school age, where it gets complicated and expensive, it's 3x to 4x Hispanic to Anglo. This is not the train is getting ready to leave the station. This is the train left the station. And again, do we legislate and do we appropriate like a state where these demographics are destiny from a public policy standpoint? And let me get a little bit more granular with you, not about 2040, but about today, how the change is not just coming, but the change is already here. Just a few select statistics about population. A majority of Texas public school students enrolled in the Texas public schools today are already Hispanic, a majority, more than 52%. The Anglo population of Texas public schools today is 28%. This is not in 2040, this is today. The last majority Anglo class, not last as in most recent, last as in final ever, majority Anglo class graduated from Texas public schools in 2014. There will never be another. Today, the Anglo enrollment in the Dallas Independent School District is below 5%. Think about that, below 5%. More than 18% of Texas public school students have limited English proficiency, and nearly 6 in 10 are from economically disadvantaged families. That is today. That's today. Think about the population of the state of Texas in 5 years, 10 years, 2040. All of you who run businesses, all of you who serve in some public capacity, my friend at the hospital, the county judge, bankers, think about how the world that you operate in, that you live in, that you serve in every day is going to change as a consequence of this population. It is hugely significant that this is the change. And as I said, by 2050, we're talking about a population in the state of Texas that is 54 million. And if you assume that the population of Hispanics in Texas is no different from 2040 to 2050, and it will be, 55% of that 54 million, more people than live in the state of Texas now, will be Hispanic. Right now, the Hispanic majority counties are disproportionately uninsured relative to the rest of the state, are disproportionately undereducated given the rest of the state's population, disproportionately less college ready, disproportionately less workforce ready. The investments we've made in physical infrastructure in the majority Hispanic counties of the state, roads, bridges, sewers, don't even get me started on broadband, much lower than in the rest of the state. My point in bringing this up is that we have a lot of work to do. Really, the most important thing from an economic health of the state now and in the future standpoint is we have got to begin to think of ourselves much more like the state of 2040. And from my perspective at the Capitol, we're not doing that nearly enough. Let me stop there and take questions for the balance of the time we have available on any subject, stuff we've talked about and stuff we haven't. Questions? Sir, Mr. Lack.
Of course, the legislature is defined by population, so I would think that the legislatures would be representing the metropolitan areas. So why are they focused on the rural areas? Is it because of compromises they must make?
Well, you know, the fact is that the state, the fault line at the legislature has always been thought to be urban versus rural, not Democrat versus Republican or liberal versus conservative. And the rural legislators of the state still do have an impact, despite the fact that the population is increasingly urban and less rural. The great example, an issue on which that is a great example, or for which this is a great example this time, is school choice. The rural Republicans of this state were the ones who have effectively killed school choice in this legislative session. Now, that may be a yay for some people, but the reality is that the rural legislators of this state still do have some power. But the fact is the population of those communities is dropping. the importance of the urban communities and the need to focus on the problems of the urban communities simply based on population trends is undeniably going up. But we're behind in terms of how we're situated. What else? Sir?
The numbers you use for the public schools.
Yes.
With a percentage of Hispanics, that kind of skews it a little bit because you don't take into consideration the private schools. Do you have any idea what percentage of school children are in private versus public?
Well, there are about 5 million, a little bit more than 5 million kids in public schools in Texas right now, and only about 500,000 in private schools. So it's about a tenth. Now, that assumes that your community has options. I mean, that's, this is why the conversation, to your point about school choice, or to my point in response to your point about school choice, is so interesting, because there are communities in the state that have private school options, alternatives to the public schools, and there are communities that do not.
Are they all in Dallas?
No. I'm told reliably that there are even some private school options here in Victoria. What else? Sir?
Special session, yes or no?
I would have told you 48 hours no, in large measure because the only person who can call a special session is the governor, and he is on the record saying he does not want a special session. But if you read the news yesterday in the Tribune or elsewhere, the lieutenant governor decided to put all of his chips on pass my bills or I'm not passing the budget. That's effectively what he said yesterday. The lieutenant governor has said if you don't pass the property tax cut bill, I put that in big quotes for the judge's benefit, that's SB 2, and if you don't pass the bathroom bill in some fashion, either the Senate's version or the House's version, he was basically going to bring the business of the Senate and therefore the state to a halt and force the governor to call a special session. Look, the legislature comes into session at the beginning of January every 2 years with only one bill that they absolutely must pass before they leave, and that's the budget. And right now, as I'm told, there is an agreement in principle out of the conference committee on the budget, but the lieutenant governor is making it so that the Senate doesn't vote for the budget, I'm told, till we resolve the issues of the must-pass bills that he's sent back over to the House. This is like high school with better food, this legislation. I mean, look, from the press's perspective, it's the best free entertainment in the world. It'd be funny if it wasn't so serious. These guys are going to have to get on the same page at some point. We may have a special session. I will be watching it from the beach in Oaxaca, but the people who work for me will be here. What else? I'd say the chances are about 50% today. They were not that 2 days ago.
Go back
Sir.
to the whole thing, voting, because that seems to be the whole thing.
Well, so let's take that a couple different ways. So there's the raw number of people who vote. It is woefully below what it ought to be. 28 million Texans, 19 million adults, 15 million, a record number as of the last election, registered to vote. But still only about 1 out of every 2 people registered to vote in the state of Texas actually turns out in November to vote in presidential years. It is much lower on a percentage basis in non-presidential years. So we're heading into an election in next November, 2018, where the governor, lieutenant governor, controller, ag commissioner, land commissioner, you'll have all the statewide offices up in the even numbered year, 2018, in the off presidential year. And the turnout is apt to be closer to 20%, not 50%, just based on trends, 25%. But really, because we don't have competitive elections in this state, the winner is really determined not in the general election, but the primary. The primary turnout is the effective voter turnout for the state of Texas. Follow me? Because really, the determinant of the winner, the person who gets to run the state for 4 years, governor, lieutenant governor, whatever, is really done in the Republican primary, not in the general election. That turnout is actually closer to 1 in 9 or 1 in 10. So really, effectively, 10%, 11%, 12% of the state is deciding for all of us who runs the state for 4 years. Now, you can say, well, how do you get more people to turn out? My question back to you is, why would they? How do you, what's the appeal for them to turn out? They already know the way this is going to go, right? A lot of people are quick to say that the Democrats will come back as soon as the Hispanic community turns out in the percentages that the Anglo community turns out. But the assumption is that the Hispanic community is more monolithic in its political views than the Anglo community. The Democrats think that the Hispanic community, if the turnout goes up, are going to vote 100% Democratic. Well, that's been proven repeatedly not to be the case. And honestly, it's not about race so much as age, education, and poverty. Those are much greater predictors of a propensity to turn out to vote than race is. So I think if anybody had a good answer as to how you turn more people out to vote, they'd be doing it. People don't want to vote. They don't see any reason. They don't think it affects them. And they think that the system is rigged. And it'd be hard to argue with that. Sir?
What faction is it to push that? Where would the money come from? That's the part I don't understand.
Well, it would come, possibly from a state appropriation. It would possibly come from donations from foundations and businesses that would provide scholarship money. That's been a course to pursue of late. I mean, the money part of it is less offensive to the people who oppose it than just the idea that we're going to take any money out of the public school system, kids out of the public school system, and have those dollars migrate to private or parochial schools without the accountability measures that you would see in the public schools. It's a fairly complicated conversation politically, and it is weirdly bipartisan in that Democrats and Republicans support school vouchers at some level, but more Democrats and more Republicans in total oppose it. The vote that took place in the Texas House on this bill, it was really more of a procedural vote, but it was effectively an up or down vote. It was basically 110 to 40 against. Now, where we stand, this is a little wonky, but where we stand is there's a school finance bill that the House passed to overhaul the school finance system. They sent it over to the Senate. The Senate's not happy that the House wouldn't pass school choice, so they put a version of the school voucher bill on the House's school finance bill as an amendment. Sent it back over to the House. So we'll see what happens.
Hey, what do you say to everyone who says everything you do is fake news? And what would you say to all these community leaders here operating in a post-truth world?
My view of this whole fake news, real news thing is that we've been in the real news business for longer than there's even been a conversation about real news and fake news. I think that this is largely the same argument that we used to have when people just talked about bias. Fake news today is bias yesterday. People think that the press is biased, that the press is against them. Here's what I would say respectfully. A lot of times when people talk about stuff as fake news today, what they really mean is, I don't like it, or I wish you hadn't written it, or I would have not written it that way myself. We all have a problem when news is fake. We all have a problem when news is inaccurate. The news has to be correct. But not liking something doesn't make it fake news. Disagreeing with something doesn't make it fake news. I think we've seen repeatedly over the last couple of weeks that journalism is telling us things that we need to know, no matter what your political persuasion is. I don't have a problem defending the work that we do. I don't attempt to defend the work that everybody does. I can only defend and should only defend the work that we do. We care about three things, and we tell Nicole Cobbler as she's coming through the University of Texas and works with us, all the way up through veteran journalists who leave other news organizations to come to work for us. Fairness, thoroughness, and accuracy. Those are the things we care about. Is the work you've produced for us to publish fair to both sides? Is anybody going to think that you didn't give them an opportunity to be heard and to have their point of view aired? Is it thorough? Did you tell the whole story? Did you leave out an important piece? And is it accurate? If you produce work that's fair, thorough, and accurate, it's not fake. Somebody may not like it. And look, we have all the time, liberals tell us that we're too conservative, or conservatives tell us that we're too liberal. That means we're doing something right. If we're making everybody mad, we're doing something right. There are bad news organizations like there are bad lawyers, like there are bad hospitals, like there are bad judges. Not everybody is bad. There are bad apples every place. Just be a good apple. That's what I tell people. Do your job. Be respectful of people's differences. Do the best work you possibly can. It'll all be fine. We in the press are fine. We're going to be fine. Nobody should run us a benefit. Thank you very much.